Good evening, you're watching Just the News. I'm Amita Balachandra. We're going to start off with our top story, which is on the Agnipath scheme and the aftermath, really, of the protests that have taken place across the country now. Protests have been reported from Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Haryana, and Rajasthan, parts of Rajasthan as well. In Bihar, protesters smashed glass windows of a train in the Bhabua Road railway station and set a coach on fire. At the railway station in Ara, police used tear gas to disperse protesters who pelted stones at the police. There were also protests reported in Jahanabad, Nevada, Chopra, and Saharsa. Now, trains were also set on fire. Rail and road traffic, especially, were disrupted. Passers-by, including a ruling BJP MLA, was pelted with stones by angry youth demanding the withdrawal of the new short-term recruitment scheme. Now, according to a report by the NDTV, phone, internet, and SMS services have been suspended for 24 hours in Haryana's Palwal district, following this stone pelting and violence incidents reported. Now, to give you a bit of a context, the Agnipath scheme was announced on Tuesday by the government. The new recruitment plan aims to cut down government's massive salary and pension bills and free up funds for arms procurement. Now, under the scheme, about 45,000 people between the ages of 17.5 years to 21 years will be inducted into the services for a 4-year tenure. Now, after 4 years, 25% of these soldiers will be retained to serve for full 15 years. And this is what protesters are largely asking across the country at this point. What happens after those 4 years is the big question. But there are reactions that have really come in, and a clarification that came in from the center, really. Attempting to pacify the protesters, the central government released a myths versus facts document addressing the concerns regarding the protesters had. Now, the government has said that those wishing to be entrepreneurs after their service as Agniveers will get a financial package and a bank loan scheme. Those wishing to study further will be given a 12th class equivalent certificate and a bridging course for further studies. And those who want salaried jobs will be given priority in central armed police forces and state police. Now, on whether opportunities for the youth to serve in the armed forces will decrease, the document said that it would further increase. Now, the document said, and I quote, "In the coming years, recruitment of Agniveers will be around triple of the current recruitment in armed forces," end quote. Now, there is obviously a lot of reactions that have come in from the opposition. But we'll start off with BJP MP Varun Gandhi, who's now written to the Union Minister, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, asking and saying that the youth have many doubts about the scheme, asking for clarifications, which the centre has already issued. But Varun Gandhi has said that the centre's Agnipath scheme to recruit citizens for short-term services in the armed forces will give rise to more disaffection among the youth. Now, there was obviously a lot of criticism that came in from the opposition as well. Several opposition leaders like Rahul Gandhi, Akhilesh Yadav, Arvind Kejriwal, among others, expressed concern about the centre's new hiring plan for the armed forces. Now, the Congress has asked the government to keep the scheme in abeyance and hold wide consultations with serving and retired officers, arguing that the scheme seems to be poorly conceived and hastily drawn up as well. Now, Bahujan Samaj Party leader Mayawati termed the scheme as unfair towards rural youth. Moving away from the story right now, the Supreme Court today issued notice to the UP government on the demolition of houses of those accused in recent violence in the state. The one incident that came to light a couple of days ago was the one in Prayagraj. Now, the court said, and I quote, "Everything should look fair. We expect the authorities to act only in accordance with the law, ensure safety so that nothing untoward happens," end quote. Now, UP had recently demolished properties of those accused of participating in violent protests. against the controversial comments that were made by two former BJP leaders. Now, the UP government and civic authorities of Prayagraj and Kanpur were asked to respond to a Supreme Court notice on these demolitions before the next hearing, which is on Tuesday. In the meantime, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad and its youth wing Bajrang Dal staged demonstrations in Delhi against the protests that have been taking place in the country after former BJP spokesperson Nupur Sharma's remarks. Now, on being asked if they support Ms. Sharma's remarks, VHP President Surendra Gupta has said, and I quote, "I don't want to comment on that. We are here to protest against the last week violence," end quote. An update on what's going on in Assam right now. The situation is quite dire because the death toll has now reached 44. Two minor siblings were buried alive in a landslide that was triggered by heavy rainfall in the state's Golpura town today. Earlier, 4 construction workers had died because of landslides as well. Incessant rains, in fact, have been hitting several parts of Assam since Monday night. And according to the Indian Meteorological Department, the state, along with Meghalaya, has received 125% above normal rainfall in the last 7 days until Wednesday. Now, the weather department has issued a red alert for the two states till the 17th of June. In the meantime, in Meghalaya, a part of National Highway 6, which connects Assam, Mizoram, Tripura and parts of Manipur to the rest of the country, was also washed away. According to State Disaster Management Authority, 8 out of 35 districts in Assam are flooded due to the rising water levels in the Brahmaputra River and its tributaries since the heavy downpour. An update on COVID cases in the country. There is a 38.4% jump in the number of COVID cases that's being reported in the last 24 hours when compared to the day earlier. So right now, India has reported 12,213 COVID cases and 11 deaths. Earlier, it had reported 8,822 new COVID cases. This, in fact, is the first time since late February that the daily cases have crossed the 10,000 mark. Now, out of these, 4,024 new cases were reported from Maharashtra, and in Kerala, 3,488 new COVID cases were reported. Moving on to business news right now. Benchmark equity and indices crashed for the 5th straight day after opening sharply higher on Thursday. This comes after the US Federal Reserve System raised its key interest rate by 0.75%, marking the biggest rate hike made by the US Central Bank since 1994. Now, Sensex closed over 1,000 points. Nifty was down 331.55 points and came down to 15,360. On to news coming in from across the globe right now. US President Joe Biden announced that the US will send another $1 billion in military aid to Ukraine, the largest single tranche of weapons and equipment since the war began. Now, the aid will include anti-ship missile launchers, howitzers, and more rounds of the high-mobility artillery rocket systems. All of these were weapon systems that Ukrainian leaders had urgently requested. One piece of good news before we wrap things up here on this bulletin. This is also our sports news for the day. Olympic gold medalist Neeraj Chopra has now broken the national record for javelin throw at Finland's Paavo Nurmi Games at 89.30 meters. Now, in Tokyo Olympics last year, he won the gold with a throw of 87.58 meters. That brings us to the end of this bulletin. Thank you so much for watching.